So I think Charles' answer earlier sort of leads a little bit into this. I think one of the, from my perspective, it's one of the key elements of what sets a science fiction book apart specifically. Sorry, did I cut you off? Do you have an answer to that earlier question?
I was going to say what they said, so you saved me from doing it.
Okay.
And now it's stupid.
So I think world building is one of the key elements of a science fiction book. You need to create a universe, you need to create some rules, setting, however, some people build more, some people build less, but did each of you find that to be a liberating process, or was it confining? Was it a lot of work to come up with that, and did you find yourself, bound by those rules?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, on purpose, decided to write. I mean, I had always really wanted to write an apocalyptic book, but also I, on purpose, for this book, which is the first book I had published, but not the first one I wrote, I set myself the challenge of writing a different world, because the first book that I ever wrote, which I wrote when I was like 21 to 24, I gave it to a friend, and he was like, "That's nice, Anna, this is at a university with 4 students and 0 professors." And it was like you said, like there was no furniture in the world, there were just like people moving around in like a total vacuum, and so I actually, it wasn't liberating so much as like productively restrictive to like force myself to make a world that people wouldn't know about so that I would have to actually make it.
I actually used this world that we live in for these last 2 novels, and but in this shared dream, Kennedy has lived, so it's an alternate. Some people have called it a possible utopia, except of course it's not. It turns out not to be. But I do a lot of research for my books, so there's a lot about World War II in here. There's a lot about real physics, but then I have my own physics, which may or may not be true. I mean, I like to think that I'm giving all the basis for the reader to believe in the physics and in the events that are happening. So, so when I build a world, it's built on this world. But with Queen City Jazz, my first novel, I really made up a whole world of a post-nanotech apocalypse world where communication was gone, and so that was pretty easy, because then you just go back to early communities that pretty much isolated themselves. So that was interesting. But then I also got to make up the world of the post-apocalypse. It's hard to let go. Once you've built a world, it's hard to let, because you put so much work into it.
That's why there's so many sequels inside.
Yes.
I made a universe, I guess, a small one, and I set up the rules to sort of favor what I wanted to do, which was keep it really small, keep it relatively open, I guess. I didn't want to have a lot of rules. I just wanted to have a few, and that was enough to help, because I think once I gave that universe a name, which is Minor Universe 31, and set up the fake science that sort of governs the dynamics of that place, I was then bound by my own constraints, and I could, it helped sort of unblock the writing. And so, yeah, I think world building, I guess I've built all of one tiny world now, and well, I guess I've written some short stories where there's worlds, but this was the first sort of non-microscopic world, I guess, and so based on that experience, I think I'll probably try to do it again, and then it won't work the next time, because that's how it goes. But setting up the constraints was really what actually got the writing going.
Kathleen, you mentioned doing a lot of research, and there's a particular subgenre of science fiction called hard SF that is very reliant on physics and on real-world science and all those aspects. And this is sort of for all 3 of you. How much is a believability of the actual science part of the science fiction? Is that relevant to telling the story you want to tell, or is it more about getting the tools in place to tell that story?
I've always tried as hard as I can to get the science right, and I usually, if I have a question, I have it vetted by someone who knows something, so that I don't, because it's like, a certain group of readers, if you get something radically wrong, it's just going to throw them out, unless you set it up to be lighthearted, in the first place, like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. But when you're trying to write something more like, I guess, realistic science fiction, I would say that the science in my novels is not foregrounded, but it's very much a part of what's going on. But it's what gives rise to the world and the actions of characters, so that you know, I feel as if it's kind of in the background, but I do try to get it all right.
The science in this is a made-up science called chronodiegetics, and so it's chronodiegetics is the science of moving around within a story. So it's supposed to be sort of partly grammar and partly narrative logic. I don't go into great detail in it, but I do use a lot of language from actual science, which I think may have set up an expectation for some people that this science should track some kind of consistent science, and it really doesn't, because it's a fake science. And but I think that was fun from a language point of view. I enjoyed doing that. So.
Well, there seems to be some depth to it. I mean, you do call out at the end Code Electrobach and this idea of strange loops, and you know, and it seems to be very much embedded in it. I mean, I don't think any of us fully understands what Hofstadter was on about, right. But I mean, was it deliberate trying to create a mirror, at least, real science, or?
Well, it was important. Yeah, I think in the sense of having it be self-consistent, right? I guess if I'm going to make a fake science, it should make some sense on its own terms, whatever silly terms those are. So yes, and to the extent that that fake science was for the purpose of telling this father-son story, that was important because there are actual sort of principles that come out of, I guess, the theories of this fake of chronodiegetics. So yeah, it wasn't just play. It was play with a purpose of ultimately this should further the story along.
I grew up watching Star Trek and also Doctor Who, but I also grew up, my mom is a biologist, and so constantly it'd be like, oh, come on, like the amino acids in the lactose, there's no amino acids in lactose. You know? So I kind of like used the mom test, at least for this, I kind of used her test to figure out if like something was too ridiculous to be in the book. I didn't, you know, as for this book, I didn't, I would say too that my science is not foregrounded at all. I didn't want to explain a lot about how the Ice Age came about because I didn't want readers to think about that at a time. But every time I was having something made of seaweed or, you know, having a solvent that eats away at people's pant legs, I did think about like whether my mom would be rolling her eyes at the TV screen, and when I got concerned that she might be, I did call her. So she made me
So science fiction is, in a lot of ways, seen as being about the future. You know, Kathleen, earlier you mentioned that science fiction isn't predictive, and you know, I completely agree with you on that point. But it seems to be in each of your novels, there's something also very much inward-looking and almost backward-looking in time. They're all about history, memory, too, explicitly about time travel. I guess my question: how did you, or why did you connect this sort of traditionally forward-looking genre with this sort of introspective, historical perspective?
Well, I think our view of history is always predicated on what other people have said. So you have to understand that what you're getting when you study history, I mean, the more you study it, the more you learn that it's not what this person said or what this, it's just a compendium of information that you can draw your own conclusions from. So my scientist, Eliane, actually invents, she is a physicist, and she's invited to work on the Manhattan Project, but she is a pacifist, so she develops a device. I was happy to learn that the atomic bomb is called the device. So she develops a device, which she doesn't know whether or not it will work, but she gets someone to build it for her. And she doesn't really know what will happen. And what happens is the events at the end of In War Times and the events that lead to this book. And the reason I said these in World War II, it has to do with my dad. He was in World War II, and I grew up listening to his stories. And I didn't know what he was talking about. He worked on radar, not as a developer, but as a He was an engineer who troubleshot radar in England, and when they're putting everything together, putting the shortwave radar into the planes and stuff like that. So I grew up hearing these stories, and I really wanted to incorporate them into a novel, into what I was doing. So that's kind of how that came about, and that led to vast bookshelves of historical books, about World War II, Churchill, Patton, just about anything. I mean, I love research. So I think that all kind of hinges on my father.
And what about you? Because American Pacific is much about trying to unpack the history of what happened to Darcy's mother. And was there a sense of you want to write a future dystopia where that was connected, or was that completely separate?
Yeah, I feel like one of the really great things about writing a book that's set in the future is that you get to have nostalgia for things that are actually happening now. And so I really wanted to think about like what it would be like to be nostalgic for, say 2010, to be nostalgic for like this time right now when things haven't gotten really totally awful yet. Maybe for, you could argue that they have. But it was just really interesting for me to apply that emotion that we almost always apply to the past to the present. And that was one thing that I was really interested in doing.
And Charles, it feels like the time travel is a very sort of personal element in fictional Charles Yu's life.
Yeah, and backward looking. I mean, I think it's sort of, it's actually this is a backward looking form of time travel that Charles Yu uses it to go back into his own life and visit his own memories. And so in that sense, it's, as sort of talking about the book, it's sort of time travel as a way to regret things. So, so that's
it's not exactly utopian technology.
No, not really. No. Yeah. So the sort of conceit, I guess, that sort of that started, things started spinning out of was, what if you had this technology and all you used to do it, used it for was just like regret and nostalgia, like.
Right.
Anybody who watches Doctor Who will know that the Doctor goes to the past like 3/4 of the time. He could go to he goes to different planets a lot, but when he goes to Earth, almost exclusively, like we're visiting Leonardo da Vinci, we're visiting Dickens. It's like an intensely nostalgic show, despite like the possibilities that it has to go, 10 million years in the future.
So I think one of the classic ideas that comes up in time travel fiction a lot is, and I think it was mentioned on this season of Who even, of you get a time machine and the first thought is let's go back to kill Hitler and stop World War II. Except I think in your books you've structured it sort of as preventing assassination rather than creating assassination, as changing the course of history. Do you have a sense of sort of how, and there seems to be, creating utopia or creating a utopian idea is almost a political action of saying, if this didn't happen, therefore these other things happen. What's your sense of whether or not, and you mentioned that you don't necessarily see this as a utopian book. Why is that?
Well, that's because all the same forces of character and humanity are still in this book, because a lot of it is about war. It's basically an anti-war book. So I did a lot of research about what causes wars, a lot of different theories. But this book is about what if there were no wars. So it's not there yet, of course, because whenever you change something, you're in a whole new set of events that are going to push back into that new. So the fact that Kennedy lives, brings with it its own problems. But my characters are also, one of the main character can see the previous time. Her brother and sister cannot, because they don't remember it. So a lot of it is about memory. So I read a lot about memory, recent memory research, because that's all we have, that's all we are. Everything is just memory, actually. So there's a lot of that in the book, the science of, as it is presently, and about neurogenesis, how the plasticity of the preschooler's brain is able to absorb so much from the environment. You know, I think, what if that could happen in adults and things like that? So there are a lot of different elements in this novel.
Well, I mean, because there is this idea of utopia, and I think my understanding of the term actually literally translates to no place. There's this idea that the utopia is a literally unrealizable dream. And I guess my question is, you know, America Pacifica feels distressingly real sometimes, but is that as unrealistic of a vision as the utopia? You know, I think what you're saying is that, you know, utopia is, or the places are inhabited by fallible people and characters, and so they collapse when they leave.
I guess I feel like dystopias are always more likely than pure utopias, just because, like, via Murphy's Law, or, you know, the same way that, like, mutations are usually bad. You know, it's the odds of a mutation screwing something up are much higher than the odds of a mutation, you know, making me be able to have awesome laser beams that shoot from my eyes and require special sunglasses. So I guess, unfortunately, I feel like, in general, the odds of some sort of general terrible thing happening to the world are almost, like, it's almost definite. That said, the odds of this actually dystopia, probably zero. Like, the way, you know, the idea that it would happen the way that I thought it would happen is almost no. Probably it won't, so relax.
So overall pessimistic, but not specifically just dystopia.
Yes.
And Charles, your book is very focused on individual characters, very inward-looking. But I guess in some ways it almost feels like he's created a personal dystopia for himself.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think it's not a dystopia so much as like the super sad universe. It's super. So yeah, personal dystopia. Now I'm gonna have to steal that. Well, I guess yeah. I think that's. I think you know. There is a little bit of, and it's somewhat lighthearted, but there's a little bit of talk of what's happened in this minor universe 31. But it is, like you said, very much a projection of sort of an internal state of mind, and it's a bit of a pocket universe, I guess.
Great, thank you.